Hey all, we're back with another algebra lesson for you. We had Memorial Day weekend, so we didn't send out the lesson on Monday. This is coming to you on Tuesday. This week we're going to be talking about solving quadratic equations. And if you're wondering how that connects to factoring, well, to solve a quadratic equation, we actually are going to factor it, and we're going to use this thing called the zero factor property. Um, We'll get into it in a second, but first I want to review factoring just to make sure we're okay with that. And we're really going to just stick to what we call simple quadratics, which are the ones where the leading coefficient is 1. And you probably haven't heard that term before, but what I'm talking about is the number in front of x squared is going to be 1. So let's look at this. It says review factor x squared plus 13x plus 40. We're going to play the x game. So first we're going to identify a, b, and c. A, the leading coefficient, that's the coefficient of x squared, that's going to be 1. B is 13. And C is 40. Okay, so, and remember, the generic form of a quadratic is ax squared plus bx plus c. The coefficient a is the one that's attached to the x squared. The coefficient b is the one that's attached to the x, and the constant c is the one that's by itself, has no x attached to it. So let's do this. So let's factor this, and remember to factor, we want to turn it into two things in parentheses multiplied together. We know that this is going to be x and x, so I'll just put those there already. That's how we get x squared. So let's think about this. A times C, that's 1 times 40, which is 40. And B is 13. So I'll put those two numbers there. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, what two numbers here and here multiply to give me 40, but add up to give me 13? Now you might have to do a little bit of work. For example, 10 times 4 is 40, but when I add 10 and 4, I don't get 13. I actually get 14. But see how those numbers are kind of close? That means that the numbers we're using are kind of close, right? So if you do a little bit of work, you'd find out that 8 times 5 gives me 40, but when I add 8 and 5, it gives me 13. So in this case, since we're factoring and we found those two numbers, we know that this is going to be x plus 8 and x plus 5. Now, if you wanted to check your work, we can always do that by multiplying this out using our area model that we did last week. We can call this, and you know what, let me move this up a little bit. Again, we're just checking. You don't have to do this every single time. Come on, get out of there. X and 8, x and 5. X times x is x squared. 8 times x is 8x. 8 times x times 5 is 5x. 8 times 5 is 40. Well, let's check. We got x squared. Check. Now we do have 13x, but remember 5x and 8x end up being 13x. Check. And then we got 40. Check. It works out. Perfect. So the question is, now what? Right? So we're factoring now. How are we going to utilize this to help us solve the equation? So a question that you might have is something like this that says solve x squared plus 9x plus 20 equal to 0. Now before we do that, we're going to talk about this thing called the zero factor property. And I'm going to write this over here. Hopefully it doesn't get cut off by my big face in the corner. Let's call this the zero factor. P-R-O-P, short for property. Now I want you to think about, if I had two numbers, A and B, and I was multiplying A and B, and I ended up with 0. We can deduce from that, because the result of A times B is 0, we can deduce that either A has to be 0 or B has to be 0. That is the only way I can multiply two numbers to get 0, is if one or the other, or maybe even both, end up being 0. That's called the zero factor property. So if we're factoring a quadratic and I end up with parentheses times parentheses equals 0, those two are still factors, right? That would mean that either this thing in parentheses is equal to 0 or this thing in parentheses is equal to 0. And when we in this case, we'll end up with something that we need to solve for x or for the variable. When you solve that, you end up solving the equation. All right, so let's jump into this one. So we're going to think about factoring this thing first. We're going to factor x squared plus 9x plus 20. Again, using our x game. Let me get that set up. And I'm going to skip some steps. I hope you guys are okay with that. A times, so remember this is, I will label that A, B, C. This is A times C adds up to B. This is 20 and this is 9. So we're thinking two factors that multiply to give me 20, multiply to give me 20 but add up to 9. Got it. 5 and 4. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 plus 4 is 9. So my quadratic is going to factor, we know this is x and this is x. One of the factors is plus 5 and one of the factors has a plus 4. And I'm going to drop down the equals 0 here. Equals 0. So we've changed from what we call a standard form into what we call factored form. Now the useful thing about factored form is we can utilize this zero factor property where we say if a times b equals 0, that means a equals 0 or b equals 0. We're going to utilize to help us solve for x. And watch what happens. If I have x plus 5 quantity times x plus 4 equals 0, that means x plus 5 equals 0 or x plus 4 equals 0. And let me remind you that that only works because we're multiplying those two things together. The only way we can get 0 from the multiplication of two numbers is if one or the other or both are 0. So now in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to solve two separate equations. I'm going to drop the parentheses and write x plus 5 equals 0. And I'm going to drop the parentheses on the right and say x plus 4 equals 0. Now I just have a simple one-step equation to solve. I'm going to subtract 5 from each side here. And I'm going to end up with x equals negative 5. And I'm going to subtract 4 from here to each side. And I'm going to end up with x equals negative 4. So I have two responses here. I have two solutions, right? So either x equals 5 or x equals negative 4 is what I would have to plug in to this quadratic to give me 0, right? It seems like it may not work, so why don't we test it out? Let's do a little test. Let's see, does my solution x equals negative 5 actually work? Well, all you have to do is if it works, let's see, let me write x squared, and we had plus 9x plus 20. Let's just substitute in negative 5 and see if we end up with 0. All right, so I'm going to write parentheses negative 5 squared plus 9 times negative 5 plus 20 equals 0. And I'm going to put a question mark there because I don't know if that's true yet. And you know what? Let me move this up here. And also, let me highlight this because this is what we plugged in, right? Everywhere I saw an x, I plugged in negative 5. So negative 5 squared means negative 5 times negative 5. That's positive 25. Plus, well, I'm going to skip right into plus because 9 times negative 5 is negative 45. So plus, if you add a negative, that's just minus 45 plus 20. Is that equal to 0? 25 minus 25 minus 45 is negative 20 plus 20. And negative 20 plus 20 is 0. So 0 does equal 0. So what do you think that means about our solution? It works, right? So what about the other one? Let's try the other one. Let's try x equals, what was it again? Negative 4. Does negative 4 work? Let's try it out. Negative 4 squared plus 9 times negative 4 equals 20. Oops, not equals 20, plus 20. Does that equal 0? And I'm going to highlight what I substituted in for x. Negative 4 squared means negative 4 times negative 4. That's positive 16. 9 times negative 4 is negative 36, so that'll be plus negative 36 or minus 36. And then we have plus 20. Does that equal 0? We don't know. That's why I put the question mark over the equal sign. 16 minus 36 is negative 20 plus 20. Does that equal 0? And sure enough, 0 does equal 0. Okay, so what did we do here? We went and we solved the equation here given to us, and we solved it by using what we call the zero factor property. And what we did is we factored the quadratic first because it was set equal to 0. After we factored it, we set each one of those factors equal to 0 because one or the other had to be 0. We solved for x and we found our two solutions. Now, if you want to take the extra step and you want to go ahead and test your solutions to see if they work, you can totally do that. Okay, so this is what we're doing this week. We do have some little what are we going to call it? A little oh man, I'm losing the word. It's on the tip of my tongue. A little wrench into the system later on this week. We're probably going to send it out to you all on Thursday. It's not going to be too much of a wrinkle. It's just something that we need to address, and then that'll be that. Just to let you all know, we only have about 3.5 weeks of school left. You need to make sure that you get these assignments done. You get them submitted to Teams, email to your teacher, however your teacher is collecting these, and make sure you stay caught up. Remember, according to that rubric, you have to do a certain number of assignments and do them well to get an A, B, C, and so on and so forth. So in any case, that's it for today. If you have any questions, be sure to email your teacher, and hopefully they can get back to you and help you out. Have a good one.